Thank you all for joining us today. I'm so excited to be here to represent BDSA. My name is Jessica Lucas, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Commercial Development at BDSA. What's really exciting about today's conversation is first, if you're aware of these three companies, BDSA, HighFire, and Deloitte, you know that BDSA and HighFire are leading the charge in all things cannabis, market tracking, data, insights, and analytics. And obviously, Deloitte, the name speaks for itself, leading the charge in all things strategy. We partnered together to dive deep into pricing, understanding the pricing dynamics within the cannabis industry. And with many of us coming from consumer packaged good, beverage, alcohol, and tobacco backgrounds, assessing are the pricing dynamics within cannabis similar or different than what we're used to seeing within consumer packaged goods. Based on the title here today, you can see very well that pricing is complicated. It's complicated in all industries and all categories, but very much so within cannabis, driven by differences in regulations, taxes, you name it. There's a lot of dynamics going on here and at work, which we'll dive into today. If you're joining us, you may have already downloaded the report that we released, again, Deloitte, BDSA, and HighFire, with the same title, Price, It's Complicated. If you haven't downloaded the report, just want to let you know that it will be sent to you via link as a registrant of the webinar. So you will have access to the full report, and we definitely recommend you dive into that. Also, please follow up with BDSA, HighFire, and Deloitte with any questions or follow-ups, and you will have our contact information coming from this. One last thing, within the platform, you'll see a Q&A button. Please click on that and type in any and all questions. If you want to address a question to a specific panelist, please enter their name as well. I'm going to kick this off, give you a little bit of an overview on the report. We'll start the panel discussion, and then we'll definitely be leaving time for Q&A. So please utilize that. Again, use the Q&A button, not the chat button. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Before we get into the details of exactly what we're going to be talking about today, again, cannabis pricing dynamics, I do want to lay the framework of where we are as we think about a global cannabis market. So we have representation today from both the US and Canada. And BDSA, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, we do global market forecasting. So we're looking at out 5 years by country, and then within Canada and the US by province, by state, and then by category, tracking and predicting out to 2026, adult use, illicit, and medical channel sales, as well as by category. When we say category or form factor, today we're talking edibles versus concentrates versus pre-rolls and flower, topicals, sublinguals, you name it. As we think about the size of the legal global cannabis market, we have 2021 legal global cannabis market at about 31 billion, growing to 62 billion in 2026. Again, all part of BDSA's market forecast. But let's also not ignore the size of the total addressable market as we think about the global cannabis market in totality, including illicit market. So as I just mentioned, 2021 legal sales around 31 billion. When we include our estimate of illicit market size, we're talking about a $225 billion global market opportunity. The US is and will continue to be the driver and the driving force of legal sales over the next 5 years, obviously driven by adult use, which continues to expand as new markets, aka states, come online. And also looking at California, it will and is currently the largest global cannabis market, and we anticipate that to maintain, again, California out through 2026. So just wanted to lay the groundwork of what we're talking about. Why is cannabis so important? A $31 billion market going up to a $62 billion global market over the next 5 years cannot be ignored. So the objective of the work today and what we're going to be talking about is really, as I mentioned, pricing dynamics. Does cannabis behave like typical CPG when we talk about pricing, or are other dynamics at play? Obviously, the answer is yes and no. It does behave in some cases. Price does matter. Just like any other industry, any other category, we consistently see both in the US and Canada that shoppers are influenced in terms of the products they buy based on pricing. It is a top driver, a top reasons why people buy what they do by state, by province, and by form factor and category. Also, not surprisingly, and this is going to be very elementary, so I apologize for saying this, But BDSA has done quite a bit of price elasticity work across markets and across form factors or categories. And not surprising, we have consistently found that unit volume increases when price decreases. And you're going to see a perspective in the report specifically on price elasticity coming from obviously these three companies, Deloitte, HighFire, and BDSA. However, I will call out, and this is where we're going to focus most of the time today, that cannabis is very complicated. It is complicated in regulations, in retail landscape, in taxes, in form factors. You know, we have the illicit market dynamics that we cannot ignore, especially in markets like California, where we know it is ever present and definitely an impact on what we see in legal sales. But again, it is very complicated. Price and quality relationship is difficult. Things, again, by form factor, THC content, other cannabinoid content, all factors here in the price value equation for a consumer. Also, within Canada and within the US, national pricing does not exist. The exact same products, so not just the brand, but the exact same SKU, flavor, THC content, dosage, pack count, again, exact same SKU, whether it's a strain or sour watermelon gummies, can have drastically varied pricing, again, across provinces and or across state markets. And as I mentioned before, a lot of different factors at play driving that, whether that be a different competitive landscape, market by market, supply constraints, the retail landscape, you name it, taxes, licensing, regulations can really drive things to look different. And that is critical to remember if you're not in the cannabis industry, that every state and every province needs to be seen as a different country. There is no national view, and we have to remember that as you assess what's going on in this industry. The last thing I'll call out, as we look at cannabis versus CPG, beverage alcohol, even tobacco, we have to call out the difference within branding. Obviously, a lot of challenges in terms of branding and what packaging looks like in Canada versus the US. Obviously, what is allowed in Canada is very different, but also in the US, state by state, things can look different. So one thing to call out again, not only does national pricing not exist, but consider the fact that national brand awareness, national brand dominance, and national brand loyalty does not exist. And that is a huge difference between this industry and others. We are anticipating that to change, but that change will be somewhat slow as we think about the issues kind of crossing borders, especially in the US. I will also call out that right now, consumers continue to tell us that familiarity, a good previous experience, and a recommendation from somebody they trust trumps brand alone as a driver of purchasing. So something to consider. Obviously, if it is a brand or a product that consumers have tried before and they had a good experience, that is definitely a positive. But again, familiarity with the form factor, the strain, the classification, the type of product, experience, having a good experience. All consumers want to have a good experience when they're consuming cannabis, and a recommendation of a budtender and or a trusted friend or family member, again, trump brand alone as reasons why people choose the products they do. So we're going to dive into all of these topics and more over the next 40 minutes. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Mary Beth to kick off this panel conversation. As I mentioned before, within Zoom, obviously there's a Q&A button. Please click it. Ask any and all questions. I'll be going through those, and you'll see me back here to ask the panelists additional questions over the next 30 minutes. So with that, Mary Beth, I will pass it over to you.
Great. So thank you so much, Jessica. That was a great introduction and a great overview of this super dynamic and super volatile industry that we're all working in. And my name is Mary Beth Williamson. I'm part of Deloitte's Center for Cannabis, and I'm really pleased to introduce a panel of 4 really, really knowledgeable people who are literally working in the weeds on this business. So I'd like to start with Rob Cherry. So Rob is the VP of Merchandising for Fire and Flower and representing retailers in this discussion. Patrick Houseworth, who is the Director of Analytics for Verano. Verano is a major multi-state operator in the US. And then we have two senior leaders from two Canadian or global, actually, LPs. Andrew McMillan, who is the SVP of Commercial for Oxley Cannabis. And we have Bernie Young, who's the SVP of Sales and Marketing for Tilray. So again, thank you all for spending some time with us. Hopefully a lot of our viewers have read the report. If they haven't, Jessica just gave a fantastic synopsis of it. But the report's one thing, and looking at the data and the analytics, it's a whole other thing to hear from all of you who are actually dealing with these issues day to day. So really looking forward to some candid responses here. So let's start with, we talked already about it's a volatile, complex pricing industry. And there's been a lot of discussion lately about the kind of race to the floor in terms of pricing. And, for example, in Canada, we've seen as supply has increased and as competition have increased, average prices have fallen by 20 to 45%, sometimes even more, depending on the category, the region, or the sales channel. And so I'm sure a lot of viewers have tuned in today to hear the $1 million question, which is in both countries, have we hit the floor? Or what do you see in terms of the future? So maybe we'll start. I'm going to give all of you a chance to respond to that, but how about we start with Rob from the retail perspective? What do you see?
I agree. It's extremely volatile. Pricing is definitely extremely volatile, more volatile than anything I've ever seen in my past. In terms of have we hit the floor, I would say I don't believe we have. I mean, things still indicate that pricing is going down. We definitely see a lot of volatility in pricing by category. I mean, flower was the first, I think, to really drop. Pre-rolls, vapes, obviously, as noted in the report, dropped significantly. We're seeing a lot of price reduction right now in concentrates, especially. So I do anticipate that pricing will continue to fall. I think the other wild card here is in Canada anyway, if the government will loosen some of the restrictions on excise taxes and whatnot, because I know that certainly keeps that floor at a certain minimum for LPs and you can't go below. I'm sure Andrew and Bernie can talk about that much more eloquently than I can, but that is certainly a factor as well that I know the government is looking at, and I would hope that there would be some meaningful progress there as well.
Yeah. Great. Patrick, you're looking at a very different market, or very different as Jessica said, you're looking at a whole bunch of individual countries within one country. What are your thoughts on pricing?
Yeah, I think it'll certainly vary market by market. I think we consistently see that obviously there is one kind of environment as a med market opens up. And then as you transition into, let's say, like a full rec market, there's a whole new surge in consumers. And so for that reason, like you're going to see pricing change again. So I think depending on the form factor, obviously, as Rob alluded to, I think flower will always be the first category to fall in pricing just because the barriers to entry are lower. And then as you move on to, let's say, vapes or edibles, whatever it may be, I think the research, the R&D, that formulation process, those barriers to entry increase. And for that reason, the value add process means that the pricing is a little less volatile. But again, I think it goes market by market, and we will continue to see this trend where supply and demand ebb and flow, basically as new consumers come aboard.
Great. Okay, and so Andrew and Bernie, maybe start with Andrew. What are your thoughts on where we are today and where we're likely to go?
I think kind of your report sort of outlined, and Jessica kind of alluded to at the beginning, and a lot of the consumer insights that we have is without a doubt price is important. And, we've seen that price sort of compression, in various categories and various products in different provinces happen throughout the year. Really, I think you got to understand what's driving the consumer purchase behavior and what's actually creating value for them. And while I think we've seen a lot of, products that have declined, I think there's also lots of examples of products that are kind of bucking that trend or really hitting the value equation. I think as our sort of supply chains ramp up and automation happens, the natural evolution of the categories, scale is going up, or production costs are, for some parts, are going down depending on the category. And I think that the consumer's benefiting on what's happening there right now. But is you really got a three-tiered model in the country, and there is taxation levels that keeps it at a certain price. And I think you are starting to stabilize today, but there are products that are getting a premium out there and really winning in the market with the consumer.
I want to come back to that in just a minute, but let's get some opening thoughts from Bernie, and then we're going to come back to premium.
Yeah, no, I think really it depends on a category by category level. What we see, and if you look at flower, although it has declined over the last little while, I believe it's stabilized. And really, when we look at that price value equation, whether it's the THC, the overall quality, the terpene profile, consumers are willing to pay if that price value ratio is fitting. However, when it comes to some of the other categories, like a few others have mentioned, with new concentrate categories, I think as we continue to convert the illicit market over to the adult use market, you're going to see some of those changes. The vape category continues to go down. I expect that to continue to happen as well, given the availability of distillate in the market and how easy it is to manufacture those products. But I think overall, from a category by category, whether it's pre-rolls, edibles, you'll see that kind of equilibrium point hit once consumers understand what's the price value equation, and is it worth their dollar? And that's kind of what we're all figuring out together.
Fantastic. Okay, so both of you in particular just talked about, we've seen a willingness of consumers to pay for quality. And we talked in the report we gave, I think Jessica also highlighted it. For example, those of us in Canada have seen now quite a bit of growth in craft flower and a consumer willingness to pay for a premium flower experience. And an example we gave was live resin cartridges in California are really growing as consumers are willing to. So, do you think premium is an opportunity, a big opportunity? Where do you see the opportunities for premium products going forward? And maybe keep going a little bit, Bernie, and we'll go back in reverse order now.
Yeah, for sure. I think the premium category is very important as new categories emerge and evolve. Concentrates is a great example. As you look at the emerging segment and how that evolves as well, the premiumization of even the pre-roll category. You think of what's changed recently with infused concentrate pre-rolls and adding value in that space. I think definitely there is opportunity there, but it comes down to the consumer. Their consideration set, they're going to have, their core as well as what they like to rotate around as well. And I think as consumers like to understand what they ultimately look for and what their preferences are when it comes to choices, whether it's, on an occasion basis or ultimately by category and what they ultimately enjoy, I think that will help set that framework as it evolves. But overall, there's definitely, like any other CPG category, those tiers and those segments based on what consumers are looking for.
Great. So Andrew, do you have sort of any build or different perspective? Because your portfolio of brands certainly, and the categories where Auxly is strongest tend to be some premium categories. So I'm really curious, how you look at it.
Yeah, I think it's, when we look at it, each sort of category different and really like the attributes of importance of the formats, by format for the consumer. I think it really differentiates between flower or pre-rolls or concentrates or edibles. So, I think it's pretty constant. We talked about price is pretty consistent across each sort of form factor. But I think when you get into 2.0 products, like vaporizers, an example, we actually see from consumers that brand actually plays a bigger role in terms of those products. And I think you start to introduce things like hardware and quality of hardware. And if you look at the frustrations associated with that, is like, those are some of the biggest consumer pushbacks in the vaporizer market. Is leaking or clogging or failures of those products, and that could really create consumer frustration. So we've seen that, the consumer most certainly is willing beyond just, as you mentioned, inputs, differentiation of inputs with fresh frozen or live products, are willing to pay premium products for vaporizers that function. I think when you look at edibles, again, it's a little bit different category where you can't fight on, where flower is so reliant on potency and terpenes. I think when you get into edibles, we're fighting the illicit market with probably an unfair restriction on THC per milligram. So I think it's much different about where everybody's fighting at that same essential limits. It really becomes about, taste becomes much more important, and then minor cannabinoids and different type of profiles and how you speak to the consumer with your those sort of as we start to introduce CBD and other minor cannabinoids, becomes much more important than just price and obviously flavor in the edibles market. So I think that's two ways that we've tried to be able to drive value to the consumer and really not just about price
Right.
with those products.
Wow. Okay, that's great. So Patrick, asking you to represent all the individual countries in the US, what are your thoughts on where you're seeing success in the premium space?
Yeah, of course. I think that I look at some of the research that BDSA has put out just in the last few months around insights into fully legal markets. And I look at the consumer segmentation in those markets, and almost half, just shy of 50% really, of consumers have only been consuming products for less than a year. So I think a lot of this will come down to education. I think that market maturity will continue to allow for greater pricing differentiation, and you'll see these premium segments continue to take hold. But there will also be opportunities for, let's say, mainstream or value players to take some market share. I think really it's a segmentation that will continue to evolve over time as consumers understand the product and understand what we're offering.
Cool. Okay, and Rob, I mean, you with Fire and Flower, you're dealing with the moment of truth for the consumers on the absolute front line. I'm dying to hear what you have to say.
Well, we've definitely seen growth in the craft and premium segments, that's for sure. And we have a lot of customers asking for it as well. It's still a relatively small percentage of our overall sales, but it is growing, and that's encouraging to see as we look for points of differentiation in the market. We've certainly seen, though, that premium is vastly more successful when that THC percentage is much higher. So we've seen a lot of success in order to be able to charge a price premium where it's craft product or premium product at a higher potency. Where the potencies are lower, it's a more difficult sell to convince the customer to purchase that. One thing that's interesting in the market, and you touched on it before with respect to live resin vapes, and this is where the regulatory environment comes into play, because live resin vapes is truly a much more premium product. However, because of the rules in Canada with respect to how you can market and talk about these products, and of course the focus and obsession with THC percentage, that category is getting blurred. And so I think it's going to be a challenge for both retailers and suppliers to actually articulate to the customer why they should be purchasing a live resin vape and paying a premium for it. And so it was very interesting to see the data in that report showing the success that it's had in California, where I know some of those marketing restrictions are a little bit different. And I think that speaks to some of the nuances between the Canadian market and some of the states in the US in terms of how we can speak to our consumer and explain what premium and craft truly means.
You actually perfectly set up my next question, but before I go to it, you talked about the current obsession with high THC and willingness to pay a premium. When you say that, what would you consider the minimum to be high THC, and what sort of price do you see your customers willing to pay?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest, it's a constantly moving target. I mean, 2 years ago, it was, hey, if you can get in the high teens, it's amazing. And then it was 20% plus. And now I think, you have a lot of producers producing THC at, in the very high 20s. And that's relatively new. I mean, those types of potencies were few and far between even a few months ago. And now we're really seeing that come into play. With respect to the price premium that customers are willing to pay, it really is a little bit all over the place, because you do see some of the more value-oriented brands now starting to offer high potency at a lower price. And then you also see more premium craft product, anywhere between 50% more, 50 to 80% more for that product. And I think it speaks a lot to consumer preferences and maybe a different type of customer, or a more discerning customer who doesn't mind paying that to get the additional benefits, including higher terpene content, or the way it's produced, and the way it's trimmed, and the bud density and moisture content, and those types of variables.
Great. So when I commented that you set up my next question, I mean, you talked about the challenge of communicating the quality factors and why to pay a premium. And I think both Andrew and Bernie and Patrick talked about it. And really, I heard all of you talking about giving the consumer value, but there obviously are also challenges in this market in being able to communicate those benefits. So maybe for the other three right now, start with Patrick, is, how do you, with your brands, help consumers understand the value equation, and have them be, willing to pay a premium when appropriate, or, even knowing why your lower price product is a good value versus other lower price products? Like, how do you do that?
Certainly. I think the answer to both internal and external education is really just continuing to add resources. I see a lot of investment basically in the budtenders themselves, making sure that they're familiar with the product catalog. Obviously, we put out many new SKUs every quarter, and even every month in certain cases. So I think it's about investing in our people and making sure that, again, those budtenders and the interactions they're having with consumers are well informed, that everybody is educated, making sure that they have the tools and resources necessary to constantly be learning, not just for our products, but the industry as a whole. And so I think one of the interesting things that I've noticed is there's certainly better and better digital libraries and places and resources that these people can go to learn about the products. And then on the flip side, I think that we also have access to a great support team. So consumers can message via our storefront or call support teams and ask questions and really get familiar. I think not everyone is necessarily always going to ask the right question when they're in the store. It can be an intimidating experience for those first-time users. So you really kind of have to meet them where they are and just try and educate at any opportunity.
Right. Okay, so maybe Bernie first, then Andrew. Obviously, we're dealing in a different sort of environment, and you both have brands, portfolio of brands in multiple categories and price points. So how do you help your consumers understand the value of what you're offering?
No, for sure. I think on the consumer first standpoint, there's definitely different channels in the digital space that we can communicate it. But I think it's really three-pronged. I mean, obviously, first driving on the consumer insight of understanding what they understand and what they don't. There's a lot of new categories like concentrates that consumers just don't understand how to use, and I think that education standpoint is important. Number two, our customers are very important in that shopper marketing angle, and really partnering with our retailers. The moment that consumer comes in to that store, making sure that we're partnering with retailers like Fire and Flower with Rob over here to make sure we're creating that journey and that understanding so consumers can learn and educate themselves there is critical. And then the last piece, which Patrick spoke about, is around the budtender as well, that one-on-one interaction to make sure that they are addressing, what the consumer is looking for, maybe things they want to try that they've never tried. But really those three things together are very important through that journey. And I think really what's unique about cannabis is the consumer and how much more consumers are willing to go in store versus traditional online, like other, traditional e-commerce and, traditional CPG as well, because of that learning. So I think those pieces are very important as we educate and evolve the industry together.
Great. So Andrew, any builds on that?
Yeah, no, I think go back to what even Rob said. I think it still differentiates sort of by category and how you drive that equation. We have 3 brands or 4 brands really speaking to fundamentally different consumer segments that had obviously, pay attention or really are influenced by different sort of attributes. And I think if you look at the experience that you can offer today in the Canadian retail, like it is somewhat restricted. I mean, you can't touch, feel, look at the products similar to what you might be able to do in the States. The budtenders, as Bernie mentioned, are really the heartbeat of this industry in Canada, and they are somewhat restricted on what they can say, but I think it's like spending a lot of time working with them, really helping them understand your value equation and the products that you're associated with, and really then be the voice of your products to the consumer. So important because they are the voice of the consumer. And I think I have a retail background, and I think Rob can speak to this too, but a lot of budtenders out there are really trying to find that best value for the consumer themselves, and really sort of like take all the hard work out for them, because the consumer's walking into any given retail store. If we look at the OCS, they've done a tremendous job, building up an assortment of close to 3,500 SKUs at any given time throughout this year. There's a lot of noise to break through, and I think they became that trusted source, and we leverage them as much as we can for sure to kind of bring our brands to life in retail.
Absolutely. So Rob, I mean, a lot of talk about retail, a lot of talk about the role budtenders play. Can you give us some thoughts on maybe what you guys are doing to help consumers on the journey through the retail and budtender experience?
Yeah, I mean, we identified, from day one that the budtender is probably the most significant influencer in terms of that customer purchase when that customer came into a store. So that's something at Fire and Flower that we were laser focused on from the very, very beginning in terms of training our canistas, we call them at Fire and Flower, training our canistas, and really offering superior customer service as a major differentiator for us. And I think we've succeeded in that sense, and we're very proud of that. I think what's interesting about cannabis, well, a lot of things are interesting about cannabis, but because there is so much variety, we do see that canista or budtender does have a significant influence over the choice. So what we try to do is actually familiarize them as much as possible with certain products and certain brands, so that they recommend, like we offer significant employee discount, for example. We want our employees to try as many products as they want, as many products as they're comfortable with, so that they can speak to it and they can understand when that customer comes in and the customer, talks about what they're looking for, they can offer, the right products for that customer. And that's, as I noted, something that is a competitive advantage for us, and something that we will continue to remain really focused on going forward.
Great. Okay, I want to maybe shift to more of an operational look right now. Which, as an overview statement, US MSOs seem to be doing quite well in terms of driving revenue and also driving profitability, whereas in Canada, we've been struggling a lot with profitability. And I've been in the shoes of an Andrew and a Bernie before, working with the exec team to set goals for the year. And I know you're always balancing volume growth, share growth, revenue growth, profit growth, and obviously pricing is a key lever. But I want to know, as you guys go into your annual planning cycles, or are they annual or are they monthly? As you go into the planning cycles, how do you balance pricing and then the big objectives of balancing share growth, revenue growth, and profit growth? Like, how are you managing in such a crazy volatile space? Hey, Andrew, you can go first this time.
Yeah, no question. I think for sure, I think we're in a growth mode. So I think if you kind of look where we came from, really launched in the market in 2.0. So, we had a big sort of presence in that space, which allowed us at the time, to probably have a little different margin structure than some of the LPs that might have been focused on flower. I think we certainly build out our portfolio on pre-rolls and automation, and we've made a big bet on that category, and to scale up our facility that where we grow our flower now. Absolutely, we feel that share of market is driving shareholder value, but I think it has to be balanced with delivering some profitable performance. to our stakeholders, which is the shareholders. And you know, it's constant balance for us as we look at this, you know, as the price changes, that, as you say, you know, I would say they change frequently. You know, specifically in the vape category, the prices have dropped significantly throughout the course of the year as we look at the illicit market and compete with them, but also you start to see, as Bernie mentioned, a lot more players kind of enter that space. So it's about that balance and how we continue to use our brands to drive sort of value back to the consumer to grow the, you know, to grow the bottom line and P&L of the company. But we certainly don't ignore, you know, the premium value segment for sure. But, you know, we're not a low cost producer. We are looking to create value through our brands and our products, and that's what we do our best every day to bring to our shareholders.
Okay, Bernie, how are you guys working to balance all the various objectives?
Yeah, you know, the biggest thing as we kind of look overall is we always kind of skate where the puck is going. I think that's very important as we look at our strategic big bets. As everyone knows, we play in all the major categories, and really, I think it's being thoughtful and strategic on ultimately making sure that we're picking the right categories and investing in them to make sure that they drive the growth and where they need to be. You know, since day one, and you've all heard from our CEO, Irwin Simon, we are very focused on profitability. That is how our organization works. I think the trickiest thing navigating in this industry is some people are, you know, pulling different levers and thinking in the short term to drive, you know, market share versus profitability. And I think kind of navigating that balance is very important. So it's really a lot of strong category management, a lot of thoughtful strategic planning and forecasting to make sure that, you know, demand plans are there, and partnering to make sure we're seeing how the market is. But, you know, I wish there was a straight answer on, you know, how do you kind of plan. You kind of got to look at you know, your baselines and look forward, but I think at the same time really be thoughtful on, you know, where are there opportunities and white space to grow, and making sure you're doubling down and making those bets to continue to drive top line growth, and that's where our focus is as an organization.
Great. Any different perspective, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's slightly different again, just given the fragmentation in our markets. I think for us, it really even starts at that very first choice of whether or not we're going to come into a particular state. I think we've been very strategic about the markets we enter. I think we, again, are strategic about what brands we deploy in each of those markets. We're not really interested in playing, you know, in a race to the bottom. We're going to deploy premium brands, and we'll be careful about our execution so we maintain costs appropriately. But our main focus for our shareholders will always be profitability over just excessive market share growth.
Great. And Rob, obviously balancing things in a different way for your organization, but how are you balancing, you know, acquiring customers and driving store sales with profitability?
Well, I would say similar to I would echo Patrick's comments that we're also looking to drive profitability and shareholder value, and we're not really interested in a race to the bottom because that is a very more of a short-term strategy in our view. I will say from a planning and inventory perspective, what is it's a bit of a double-edged sword as a retailer, because outside of Saskatchewan, where we can have a warehouse right now, and we actually have a thriving wholesale business there as well. But outside of that, we're not really in control of our supply chain. We order every week from the various provincial boards, and what we order is subject to their availability. So on one hand, you know, that poses a set of challenges in terms of how do you plan your inventory, how do you plan your categories. On the other hand, it does afford you the ability to be very agile and be very nimble with your inventory. And it's worked well for us in this space because there's so much newness in terms of products, and there's so much volatility in terms of price that actually being nimble and agile like that benefits us as a retailer, and it benefits the consumer, because what it means is we've always got, you know, the latest product, and we've always got competitive pricing. And that's been part of our journey as a retailer as well, and rolling with the punches as the industry continues to evolve.
Right. So I heard also all of you talking about certainly a focus on the consumer and a focus on using data to inform your decisions. So I would imagine a lot of the viewers today would be interested in understanding what data do you have available to you currently, and how do you use it to inform decisions, and what don't you have that you wish you had going forward. Andrew, do you want to start?
Yeah, no, I think you know, you hit a lot of key points there. I think you have to be sort of data rich right now to win in this market. I think, you know, we partner with as many sort of data sources that we can. HighFire is a tremendous partner that gives us tremendous visibility into the market sort of retail offtake data. And I think, you know, we've also spent, prior to ever building our brands, our product portfolio, I think we did a lot of focus on consumers. So understanding, you know, the segmentation, the path to purchase, and sort of the need states that we're trying to solve as a group of companies across the, you know, the country. You know, I'm going to say an obvious one in terms of like data that we don't have is, you know, you don't get a lot of black market, you know, illicit market data. And, you know, as we really, you know, we look at the Canadian legal market space, we estimate it's going to be close to, you know, $4.5 billion next year in Canada, and there's still a large part of that sort of segment that sits on the illicit side. And you know, we try to do as many sort of focus groups or consumer sort of reporting as we can to try to tap into those to really leverage the insights they have, that what's not keeping them there. I think, you know, we've also done a lot to, you know, it's to try to entice them to come over with our products, but I think there's a lot of work that we've done on the retail side of things in terms of like convenience and really the underperformance of even e-commerce as an industry is a big opportunity for us to capture that sort of, you know, outstanding sales that are just sitting there.
Just a quick follow-up. So you preempted my next question too, which is around illicit market. Do you have any data source to track illicit market pricings? In particular, you talked about consumer insights coming from them. Do you know, is there a resource to get illicit market pricing? Do you do price audits, or are you mainly focused on the legal framework?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we track whatever we can. I mean, there's like the consumers are not always willing to admit, you know, where they're purchasing, but I think we do our best to track it where available online and work with great folks like yourselves to really do that market sizing where it's available. But I think a lot of it, like I said, we do our own consumer focus groups and really try to seek out those consumers and try to understand what value is keeping them there, and is it products or is it just convenience of shopping? Is, you know, I still think there's a lot of consumers that are purchasing online today that absolutely have no idea that they're buying from the illicit market. Right. And I think it varies by category. And I would say, you know, you kind of heard me talk to edibles a little bit about in the beginning, but I think there's a lot of, or we know there's a lot of consumers that the barrier to entry into the legal market is potency restrictions. Right. And that's something that we continue to push the federal government on our regulations. I know our partners, you know, like OCS and AGLC do the same because they do a lot of those insights as well. But for the most part, from the insights we have, we don't believe the consumers actually know they're getting it from an illicit source a lot of the time. So it's a huge opportunity as an industry to sort of promote that and work with regulators to try to bring those consumers over to the legal market.
Yeah. Rob, so I mean, not just Fire and Flower, you're also HighFire, a major data supplier. Yeah. So is there anything you don't have?
Well, I think, you know, Andrew made some really great points about the illicit market and the data. And you know, I fully agree. It's also interesting, you know, a lot of reports have been coming out lately. I think I saw one, you know, last night about, you know, some illicit market product where they found traces of, like, you know, mice feces and stuff like that, right? So there's a lot there that I don't think people really fully understand. Or potency, for example, right? Like they're seeing that a lot of what they're claiming isn't actually the case, that there's a lot of toxic substances in there. So a lot of it, I think, in that sense, is just education and understanding. And I would agree that, you know, the average consumer, it's not always clear to the consumer, you know, if they're getting it from illicit sources or not, because some of these, you know, have, you know, storefronts or websites. Yeah. And so to the question about how do we track, you know, illicit pricing? Well, I mean, there's Statistics Canada, obviously, that provides a good data subset, but I mean, you can literally go to the websites and see what they're charging and what they have. And it is quite surprising that these websites are still allowed to operate, especially given Health Canada's mandate with legalization of cannabis. But with respect to outside of that, again, obviously the fact that, you know, from day one, we identified, you know, data as being another key driver and differentiator for us. We acquired, you know, HighFire as part of our organization and core to our organization, and developed proprietary and market leading business intelligence dashboard. So through that, there truly is, you know, you can really go down that rabbit hole in terms of all kinds of, you know, point of sale insights and consumer insights and segmentation analysis. And, you know, I wish there were more hours in the day, but it truly is very insightful and fascinating data that certainly helps us understand decisions we make with respect to pricing, with respect to marketing, with respect to category strategy, promotional strategy. I mean, it's all there, and it's really beneficial to us to be able to have that information at our fingertips.
Okay, Patrick, Bernie, can just, if you have anything to add to build on what's been said, because then I want to wrap up this formal part. I know we've been getting some really good questions from viewers, so I don't want to shortchange that. So Patrick, any additional perspective in terms of what you guys use that you haven't heard already in terms of data or outages that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think that things are certainly a little bit different in the US, just given the availability of different point of sale platforms and things like that. I think that we've had an opportunity to build a proprietary tool that gives us insight into all parts of our business, and that's been incredible for us. I credit our founders, Sammy and George, for valuing those insights and really bringing a nerd like me in. And then I think the other thing too is talking about basically what we don't have today, right? And I think that's unique to the US. I think for us, we, let's say, make a wholesale sale to another dispensary, and the data ends there, right? And so we rely very heavily on somebody like BDSA to provide those market research data points and give us a glimpse into something that we don't normally see. And so I think that's definitely an interesting quirk of this industry, and not traditional amongst, let's say, more standard CPG.
Great. And Bernie, again, same thing. Any additional data your team at Tilray uses, and or are there some gaps that you're really looking to have filled?
Yeah, no, I think most of it's covered. There's obviously the POS data, and BDS has a view of the US market as well. I think it's important to highlight, though, the consumer in the US and in Canada, and what we're seeing from an insights perspective, they actually behave very differently. If you think about some of the categories of penetration versus some of, you know, in Canada versus the US, you know, some of the consumers aren't educated quite there yet. And there's a lot of differences that we're observing as we learn more about the consumer, looking at a lot of the qualitative as well as the quantitative studies we're looking at as well to really build the differentiation in the market. So there are gaps. I think they've been highlighted, but, you know, every year it continues to evolve and the data becomes more rich. It's more of kind of stitching those insights together to, you know, ultimately fill the right strategy for our company.
Fantastic. So I'm going to switch over now to Jessica. She's been reading the questions we've been getting from the viewers, and she's going to try to ask as many as she can in the time that we have left. So again, thank you for so much. I'm going to mute myself and let Jessica take over now.
Hey guys, it's good to be back. I've got a few good questions from the audience. Quite a few for our Canadian panelists. So I'll start with a couple there. Sorry, Patrick, we'll get to you in a second. The first question, and I'm gonna throw this at Bernie first, but everyone else feel free to chime in. From your perspective, do we have a timeline when the major boards will take a back seat and potentially allow retailers to purchase directly from the LPs? And if so, is this a positive thing in your perspective, or are there challenges with that opening up?
That's a good question to kind of kick things off. I think, you know, firstly, there's been some paths depending on the provinces, they're very different. So obviously in Ontario, the OCS is there. In Saskatchewan, you know, it's direct as well. I think there's pros and cons on both sides on that. In terms of, you know, on one side, I would say when you've got a board there, it helps regulate and manage the flow of new products into the market, making sure that there are timelines and milestones, and it really helps the retailer kind of plan appropriately as they look at new products kind of flowing through there. On the other hand, I would say with retailers as well, there's definitely opportunities for LPs to speed up new products into the market and go direct and create unique products that may be specific for the retailers. So I think there's a benefit to both angles as well. In terms of the timeline, I think every province is different the way they're approaching things. I think there's going to be a little bit more time as they kind of evaluate some of them flowing through. But I would say overall, different consumers, different markets. So I would say just where they are today will likely kind of be the path over the next 18 to 24 months.
Great. Rob, anything to add on that?
I think Bernie said it perfectly well. The only thing I might say is one thing we know in cannabis is that change is constant, right? And that's the only thing that is constant is change. So, if you don't like what you see, wait a week. So I would say, this is where things are right now, but, the industry will definitely continue to evolve, and understanding, where it's headed and being prepared for various scenarios will be key to success.
Great. Next question, and I'm going to address this slightly differently for those in Canada versus the US. So Patrick, I'm going to start with you first, and feel free to tell me you don't want to answer this question. As we think about borders, and we think about pricing looking very different state by state. So we can break down the price per gram of flower in California, Arizona, Missouri, Michigan, Illinois, for example. With states bordering each other with drastically different pricing, do you have any thoughts or perspective on consumers' willingness to travel to get the best price possible?
I think it's undeniable that it happens. I think we've seen enough data to indicate that those operators that are, let's say, right on a border do quite well, and you have people traveling across state lines. But it's hard to say, right? I don't think that it's easy enough to indicate with the customer data that we do have whether somebody is doing that. So.
Yeah, and we've found consistently in the kind of tracking of consumer and shopper behavior that convenience or location is the number one driver of where people shop. But I do want to ask the question to all of you, or a couple of you, whoever wants to address this. Do you think people are willing to drive across town to go to a retailer or dispensary who does have a specific promotion going on or a lower price point? I'm not sure, Rob, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would say the short answer is yes. Long answer, I would say it really does vary quite a bit. We see tremendous amount, in Ontario, for example, a year ago, I believe we were at 100 stores, and now we're at over 1,000, right? So that changes how far the customer is willing to go. That changes the competitive landscape. But we've certainly seen that when we've run some major promotions, we've seen some very significant sales lifts, and our data does tell us that customers are willing to travel and come to our stores to get those products or get some of the newness and some of the promotions or some of the great, deals we have going on. Right.
And an added question to that, and Rob, you might not want to answer this directly, so don't feel like you have to, but do you want to grade yourselves from your perspective on how well you're doing at, let's say, assortment planning, either by different store segments or based on shoppers going to different locations? So do you want to grade yourself on how well you guys are thinking about assortment and category management? Obviously, thinking about what consumer packaged good retailers can do with the data they have. Do you feel, we're at, as an industry, maybe 50% of the way there as CPGR in terms of assortment planning and category management, or are we still a very long ways away from that?
Is that you want I can give you the retail perspective.
Yeah, that's what I want.
You know, if I had to grade us, I would probably give us maybe an 8.5. I think we've done a phenomenal job of having a wide assortment that addresses the various needs and wants of our customers and the variability of our customers, right? We see that cannabis in many ways is the great democratizer in terms of, you know, you have young people, older people, I mean, people of all different demographics coming to shop at our store. And so I think we've done a very good job of being able to deliver to those needs, but there's always room for improvement, right? And at retail, you can always do better, and you always have to do better. So I hesitate to give ourselves higher than an 8.5 because I know there's still room to try to get to a 9 or 9.5 or even a 10 one day, and that's what we work really hard to try to achieve every day.
Yeah, Bernie, question for you. The dynamics of price and THC content, frustrating for many. I'm sure you guys have all kind of read some recent reports and such that are speaking to how do we educate consumers that percent THC is not what they should be purchasing based off of. Any perspective you have on kind of does this go away and what needs to happen in order for THC to price to be the #1 driver of what people are purchasing?
Yeah, I think today that is probably one of the most dominant pieces. If you walk into any store, they open the binder and it's ranked from highest potency to lowest. And that happens based on what consumers have today. It comes down to education. I think because we're such a new industry, I think a lot of consumers are going to start to realize that as they test and LPs and as an industry, we leverage different areas. So for example, it doesn't have to be the highest THC. It could be an 18%, but have a great terpene profile and ultimately come from a cultivar that gives you a better entourage effect. But I think as we start to segment and look at the consumer and understand how to educate them as an industry as a whole, that's going to be key. But today, the consumer is shopping by potency and price in cultivars. And I think as different attributes kind of evolve, I think some of the panelists mentioned around the quality, bag appeal is very important. I kind of reference it kind of like, when you eat a nice meal or you look at food, right, your senses are elevated, right? From the way it looks, the way it smells, the way it tastes, all of those attributes are important. So I would say that's something that's going to require some education, but in terms of the trend line, that's kind of where it's going. But I think different characteristics of the product, again, based on different brands and what we're targeting will ultimately evolve, and you'll start to see that segmentation break apart.
And Andrew, to add to that, Bernie just mentioned terpene profiles. We talk about genetic composition of the plants. We talk about minors or minor cannabinoids, your CBN, CBGs, THCA, THCV. We're seeing these products pop up everywhere. From your perspective, do consumers and shoppers actually get that? Do they know what those mean? Or is it more marketing or buzz than anything else?
Yeah, no, I think I kind of go back to the regulatory environment that we are in today and the packaging that we're in and the requirements that we have, or the restrictions of the requirements that we have to have. And I think you look at a lot of the packaging and, potency is there. So I think it's on us as an industry to really, I would say get consumer trust that once we get potency and bud quality and structure to a certain point that, they're comfortable buying most brands. I don't think you see, like I come from the bev alcohol industry. People don't necessarily buy whiskey by, alcohol potency. They buy it from like, the craft of the product, and they all trust that it's like, it's going to play in a range of potent or, alcohol by volume. So I think it's up to us as an industry to really gain that. I think as genetics improve, I think you're going to see that potency will improve and we refine our processes. But I think from a branding perspective, I think some of the restrictions have to sort of relax a little bit to allow us to talk about more things on the packaging to really get into those terpene profiles, because I think as much as we, there is a certain segment that gets them today, but in large part, there's a lot of THC chasers out there, and I think it's the easiest thing to talk to, and it's really, like I said, it goes back to what's on the packaging today and the environment that we're shopping in. I think, again, I came from retail. I think we could sort by terpenes back at launch day, and trust me, it was quickly, it wasn't relevant. The consumer didn't understand it yet, and they were really, really just about like what that strain is. You know, I think if you cluster what all the strains are, there absolutely is a portion of marketing that's associated with the naming convention and really, you know, what all those genetics are as people try to differentiate their products as well. So just to kind of touch on that last one.
Yep, great. And we are about at time. One thing, Andrew, I'm glad you mentioned was talking about the whiskey category, because I think it's a good example of, you know, how do you create premium tiers within a specific form factor, and even I would say a subcategory of a form factor. So for example, in California, we see 75% of vape cartridges in a premium price tier being live resin. But what's going to be even more interesting is when we start seeing price tiers within live resin vape cartridges. And I just don't think we're there yet, thinking about, you know, a differentiator like being live resin versus distillate, for example, or having CBD versus not in the product might be a good driver of pricing. But within those segments, so within CBD gummies, are we going to start seeing price differentiation? And I just don't think we're seeing that quite yet. So with that, I want to thank you guys all for joining us today. Great discussion, great panel. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a follow-up email. You'll have access to the report. You'll have access to reach out to us with any and all questions. So with that, we will close out. Hopefully everyone has a great holiday season. And again, we are all available if there are any questions. There's a lot of data behind everything that was discussed today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.